What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to talk through my top 10 2024 Dynasty rookie wide receiver rankings. This is going to be my first impressions, my first run through on the channel. I just spent the last couple of days inputting all the combine data into my spreadsheets to bring to you essentially my first review, my first overview or rough draft of how I see this rookie wide receiver class. We'll talk through what I'm kind of taking from the combine, what's changed since the combine, what my numbers say when it comes to this class. Just an all-encompassing video for this 2024 class that with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers and Odunze, all these studs at the top, seems like one of the best wide receiver classes in recent memory. Today, we are going to decide if that is the case. So with all that being said, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen, she gon' let me.
Now, before we even get into the players, I will say we're going to have timestamps on this video. If you don't want to hear any of the preamble about how to kind of deal with numbers from the combine and what my model is at this current state, you can skip ahead. There's going to be timestamps to get to the players here, but I do want to just give out a PSA. Don't overreact to the combine, all right? Athleticism doesn't matter much for wide receivers, but it does heavily impact draft capital. So remember it from that perspective. It doesn't really matter if a guy's a freak, but if a guy tests as a freak and that pushes him into the first round, like say Xavier Worthy, right? We already knew he was fast, but he just broke the 40-yard dash record. So we don't want to double count him being a fast wide receiver, but we do want to say he now goes from a fringe first rounder to a guy that could be like a top 15 pick just based off of that speed alone. So it's something to kind of be mindful of during this process. This is a great chart from Keon Coleman. You can see the athleticism metrics impact draft position a lot more than NFL success. So that's really what we want to look through the lens with these wide receivers. If they had a great combine, that's good for their draft capital, but doesn't really mean that they're going to be a good player at the next level. Now, for wide receivers especially, it does not matter much. Here are my prospect models. I have a tight end, running back, quarterback, wide receiver model. You can see here in terms of percentage of my model, the RS grading system that is taken up by relative athletic score, any athleticism metric, 6.8% compared to quarterbacks. That's pretty much double that. Running backs that are like 1.5x that, and then tight ends using it the most. So just something to be aware of. With wide receivers, it is truly not the end all be all. Now, I usually use these post-combine rankings videos we've done in years past. I'll probably just link it above, but I usually go through my entire model, how it works, how I've gotten to the conclusions. But we've already done that before. We're not going to spend too much time talking about them, but with my RS grading model for wide receivers, it's at least good to sort of be aware of what it is. So what it is you have these components: draft capital, receiving yards per team pass attempt, so just receiving yards divided by team pass attempt, receiving yard market share, what is your market share of the receiving yards in an offense, SRS and strength of schedule. That's just, are you playing in the SEC? Are you playing at UMass like an Andy Isabella? You have Land-Zierlein grade. That's just another sort of draft capital film metric, age/early declare status, and then RAS, relative athletic score. You also have multipliers like Land-Z grades, RAS, relative athletic score, being a top 10 pick. That takes your base RS grade and boosts it. Now, after you get the RS grades, you get hit rate buckets. The RS grades take all those components and spits out a number 0 through 10, and you get a list like this. This is the 2019 to 2021 draft classes at wide receiver, sorted by RS grade, and it's pretty good, right? When we look at the hit rate buckets, right, it's a 0 through 10 scale. Legendary can go above that 10, right? So Jamar Chase at 11.65. That's just because he's a monster. He's the best wide receiver in the entire RS grading model. Now, legendaries have a 10 or better RS grade. They hit top 24 seasons 100% of the time. Elites, 83% of the time. Gold, 50% of the time. Silver, 21% of the time. Bronze, 4%. So you can kind of see, it's like Madden in a way: legendary, elite, gold, silver, bronze. We want the legendaries. We want the elites. Now, that's all good and dandy. It looks pretty. It really only matters if it's beating out NFL draft capital. Is it doing that? Yes. We have a 0.78 R squared from RS grades to years 1 through 3 points per game. That's what we're shooting for. We want players who produce in their first 3 years. I think it's a fine proxy for NFL success. And then when we do it with draft capital, so just draft picks, it's a 0.339. R squared is just how much do the inputs correlate and impact the outputs 47.8% for RS grade, 33.9% for NFL draft capital. So it's a pretty solid model. I didn't really tweak too much. The only big tweak is I had a multiplier for Land's Zierlein grades that would, if you weren't a first round pick, but Land's Zierlein had you graded as a first round pick, you would then get pushed up and get a multiplier. The issue is that multiplier was shooting some players above what would have happened if they had first round draft capital. So we had an issue where Troy Franklin has a really good Land's Zierlein grade. But if he was a first round pick, he would be gold. If he was a second round pick, he would be elite, which is an issue. We shouldn't be rewarding worse draft capital. That's just a flaw in the system. So it did actually take away some hits, right? I think in terms of guys that Land's Zierlein was high on that the NFL was not, Devontae Adams was one, DK Metcalf. I think Alshon Jeffrey might have been one. T. Higgins, Deebo Samuel, like Michael Pittman was one too. He has a lot of really good hits, but it did move some of them down the pecking order. You know, it took Devontae Adams out of elite, took DK Metcalf out of elite after this change, but again, it was a common sense change. So now I have it where your Land's Zierlein multiplier can only give you exactly what you would have had if you had first round draft capital as like a cap. So you can't get multiplied, you know, where it's better to be a second round pick than a first round pick. That just doesn't make sense. So moving on from that, I will say in the past I've revamped things. I don't want to overhaul the wide receiver model every single year because then it's just overfitting and being like, oh, well, the model loved Quentin Johnson last year. Let's now make a model that doesn't like Quentin Johnson and lowers him down so we can avoid the next one. And it's just, you're overfitting at that point. No model is going to be perfect. You're not going to have a 100% hit rate. You just have to live with that. Now, when we talk about this wide receiver class, we can finally get to the players. I feel like I kept that pretty quick here. Again, I'm going to have timestamps on this video. Which brings us to the tier list. As always, I feel much stronger about the tiers than I do the rankings within each tiers, especially right now, right? We have pro days coming up. We have actual draft capital on draft day. We have team landing spots. Like these rankings are going to change a bunch, but I do feel pretty strongly about where I have the tier breaks. We have generational, top 10, first rounder, first, second rounder, and day 2. Just, you know, generational talent, a guy I think has a top 10 talent, first rounder, so on and so forth. Our wide receiver 1, Marvin Harrison Jr. His pops is a Hall of Famer. He's a monster. He's like 6'3", 210 pounds. He reminds me a ton of AJ Green. And we're going to kind of look through the lens a little bit here today of like what happened at the combine. Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't test, but Dane Brugler here says, you know, no team is adjusting their draft board based on Marvin Harrison Jr. not running a 40. They have the GPS numbers anyways. Albert Breer below that tweet says Marvin Harrison Jr. will be in Indy. He will meet with teams, but he's skipping testing because he's just going to train playing football instead, which has a ton of merit to it, right? There's no reason to train for a 40 when you can just run routes and do like functional drills that actually translate to the games. Whereas more of the fringe players, the guys who aren't the absolute studs, maybe they want to train the 40 a little bit harder. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. comes out as an absolute stud in the RS grades. He is a legendary wide receiver prospect without even needing athletic testing. If he had athletic testing, he'd be much higher on this list. But he is in, you know, this is a great list to be a part of. He is a legendary wide receiver prospect. He has the best, in my eyes, you know, Ohio State's kind of wide receiver U at this point with like, it's them or LSU most likely. But rarely do they put together 2 seasons like Marvin did. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the only Ohio State wide receiver. Think of all the guys, you know, Garrett Wilson, Olave, JSN, Emeka Egbuka. If you go prior to that, you have like Michael Thomas, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel. I don't know. You have a bunch of guys, right? I think that he's the only one in school history with 2 1,000-yard seasons. He did it with CJ Stroud, and then even more impressive with Kyle McCord this past year. He's an absolute stud. I don't want to spend too much time talking about him, though. I think AJ Green is like your slender, prototypical X, great in contested catch situations, an absolute like acrobat across the board. He is a really fun player, very exciting for all of us. He's also like a lock. He's in a class that didn't have quarterbacks like this. He could be a first overall pick. You know, I'm trying to think of like that. The Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett year, he could have easily been first overall. So he is super special. Now, I will say, I don't see much of a gap between him and Malik Nabers, man. I've been saying this, but Malik Nabers is no consolation prize. He is no, like, he is wide receiver 2 for me, but it's really 1A, 1B. Malik Nabers is a strong wide receiver prospect. him and Marvin Harrison Jr. are the two best. I've only been doing this since 2019. They are the two best wide receiver prospects I've seen since Jamar Chase. It is Jamar Chase, and then it is these two in my eye. Now, when we see here Malik Nabers in contention for the top wide receiver taken, he won't run at the combine. So he also didn't test. But what I did find funny, or not funny, but I found it interesting, was when we look at that Albert Breer, this Dane Brugler tweet where he says, with that said, Malik Nabers is already viewed as wide receiver 1 by some teams. Both are top 3 prospects in this draft. So Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr. in a class with like 4 quarterbacks that are going to go first overall or first round. Malik Nabers is a guy who is valued as a top 3 pick and potentially the wide receiver 1 on a bunch of teams' boards. He is that good. Now, when we talk about him, he has one of the cleanest profiles ever coming out of LSU. This is receiving yards per team pass attempt, so one of my big production metrics I use in my model. And he has the best one across the board, right? Better than Jamar Chase, better than Jarvis Landry, better than Odell Beckham, better than Justin Jefferson. The list goes on and on. And the crazy thing about him is this is experience adjusting. So this is year 1, year 2, year 3. It's not by age. If we were to age adjust it, it would just be bonkers. He is 20 years old. He does not turn 21 until July. That's crazy. I think Jamar Chase was 20 in his second year, so you could move Malik Nabers back to that year 2, and just the fact that he is the only guy in here that cleared a 4 in receiving yards per team pass attempt is absolutely insane. Now, I will say I think that this is a screenshot from mid-season. Maybe a game or two happened since then, and Malik Nabers went down to a 3.82, but still, he's at the top of this list. He is a monster producer. Next to Brian Thomas Jr., who we're going to talk about in a second here. He's going to be a first rounder. Malik Nabers played next to him, absolutely balled out, had 86 catches, 1,546 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns. And now I've been sort of toying around with my model. This is the big thing. I haven't done much of the overhauling I wanted to do. Not that I wanted to do, but like I said earlier, I don't want to overhaul the model every single year. But I want to get some better comp data just to make historical comps that are kind of fun. And this was good. So you have slot percentage. So this is all career stats on PFF. So it takes all of your seasons into account. Now, their career slot percentage, 56% to 18.3%. Their ADOT, both around 12. Yak per reception, CeeDee Lamb at 8.8. Malik Nabers at 6.6. But Malik Nabers has them beat in the missed tackles forced per reception category. So they're both really explosive after the catch. They're both good in contested catch situations, both over 50% contested catch percentage. And then contested target percentage, which is really interesting. Now, we're going to see later when we talk about guys like Keon Coleman, it's not great if a high percentage of your targets are contested because it means you're not getting open. It means you're just getting thrown up 50-50 balls, and that doesn't translate. Guys we've seen like that in the past have been J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, where he made his bread and butter off of jump balls. That's a bit of an issue. Now, they're both, slender, 6 foot, 6'1", 200 pounds on the nose type wide receivers. They are both guys who can play inside and out, all-around wide receivers, electric after the catch. But the thing with Malik Nabers is he will jump from elite, right? He's elite right now. He will go to legendary the minute he gets an 8.8 or better relative athletic score, which I think most of us are expecting, where if we look here, that's where he ends up. But the PFF game athleticism rating is a new thing that they've been doing. And you can see here, Malik Nabers is 99th percentile. A.D. Mitchell is 99th percentile. He just ran a 4.3. Xavier Worthy is 99th percentile. He just ran a 4.2. Xavier Leggett, 99th percentile. He just ran a 4.3. So if this means anything, it means the minute that Malik Nabers tests, he's going to test absolutely out of this world. I know a lot of film guys. I don't watch a ton of film, but I know film guys absolutely gush about his acceleration where he can just fly past people. He looks like an absolute monster. And again, if he hits those relative athletic score marks that we're looking for, he is somebody that's going to be in this legendary tier where he is going to go, in between Dez Bryant and AJ Green as one of the 5 best wide receiver prospects we've seen since 2007 is as far back as my model goes. You can see here, Jamar Chase, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, the 3 best wide receiver prospects ever. I think that's pretty spot on. Then AJ Green. And then Malik Nabers would be right in the mix with the rest of those guys. Really, really exciting stuff because I think he's going to test well. Now, moving on from that, I'm kind of, by the way, I'm treating him as legendary at this point, but he is elite until we see him test. Now, moving on, we have our top 10 tier. And this is where I'm going to put Rome Odunze. He's my wide receiver 3. And a big thing for me this offseason is growth. In years past, We've made the mistake of putting George Pickens ahead of Chris Olave, not liking Chris Olave's prospect profile because of early declare and him not declaring and being a senior. Old me would have pulled up this screenshot and said, well, here are, your top 15 picks who weren't early declares. And it's not a great list, right? It's Devontae Smith, it's Chris Olave, and then it falls off a cliff to like Mike Williams, Devontae Parker. Justin Blackmon was a stud. He's really not a miss in my eyes. But Michael Floyd, Tavon Austin, Corey Davis, you can name all the busts there. And I would have said, well, you can get Rome Odunze, but his numbers aren't as good as the other guys, and he's not an early declare. The thing that I'm kind of coming to grips with is a lot of the analytics community, including myself, a year or two ago, the whole point of putting together a model is spotting the next Kevin White, Tavon Austin, guys who get drafted in the top 10, Corey Davis, and suck, right? They shouldn't have gotten drafted there one way or the other. They get pushed up, or Tavon Austin. I mean, his highlight tape is crazy, but like, goddamn, a 5'8" wide receiver probably shouldn't have gone top 10 in the NFL draft. I kind of think that the NFL is growing alongside us, where they're also trying to learn from those mistakes of drafting like a Kevin White in the first round. I think that they have enough analytics in their front offices that we're not really going to see that type of mistake again. So I think it'd be disingenuous to sit here and say, well, Rome Odunze is the next, Corey Davis or John Ross or Darius Hayward-Bay. I don't know that we're going to get another one of those guys. I think that analytics is best served. We're always going to have, like last year, Quentin Johnston. You're going to always have your Nelson Aguilars, your Brashad Perrimans, just Laquan Treadwells, Josh Doxsons, guys who get drafted in the late first and are either Justin Jefferson or like Jalen Reagor. That's really what analytics should be used for, not like nitpicking a player that's going to go in the top 10. So Rome Odunze, my model doesn't love. He's a gold wide receiver prospect, but I'm going to be treating him as if he's an elite, because I just think that the model is not really accounting for COVID as much as I would like it to because of the early declare status. And on top of that, he is a really, really young senior, where he's 21 years old. He's going to be 21 on draft day, Rome Odunze, same age as everyone besides Keon Coleman and Malik Nabers in terms of the top guys. 21 is a great age. And when we look at his production metrics, they're not great, but if you were to age adjust them, and you moved Rome Odunze's numbers like a year back, they wouldn't look as bad, right? Like Rome Odunze's year 3, if you put that in the year 2 spot, would be right next to Malik Nabers. If you moved Rome Odunze back to the year 3 spot, he'd be above the dotted line. The production wouldn't be all that bad. You also have to remember, he was in the same offense as 2 other NFL players, and Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. It's going to be tough to dominate that offense with 3 guys in there. Now, I think it's just tough to ignore how much film guys love him. This is Dalen Jeremiah. I don't know how pixelated this is going to be, but he has Rome Odunze as his number 3 overall player on his board, not just wide receiver. Overall player on his board, Rome Odunze. The film guys, again, absolutely love him, and I wouldn't say anybody's prospect model is the end-all be-all. There's actually a really cool public model on NFL's website, NFL Next Gen Stats here, where you can see Rome Odunze is their wide receiver 1 right now. And I think that that's going to change once we get Malik Nabers testing here. But you can see the description up top. It says NFL Next Gen Stats draft model analyzes historical NFL Combine, Pro Day, college production to predict a prospect's chance of success in the NFL. The results of the model are transformed into composite scores ranging from 50 to 99. 90, the only elite one there. So again, other models and stuff, they like him. So I'm not going to put my foot down and say, well, he's going to be the next Corey Coleman or whatever. I just think it's disingenuous. He's really good. He passes the eye test. I saw him down the stretch, college football playoffs. He looks like the real deal. He looks really good. Guys gush over him. So again, I'm not going to be snobby with my numbers. Now, we put him through the comps process, and I actually kind of like what it pulls up for him. He's somebody that can play inside and out, right? About 24% of his routes are in the slot. 13.78 out, so he's a little bit further downfield. 5.2 yak perception is nice. I have heard the Chris Olave comps, and I did dispute that on Twitter today. I don't love him. He is 6'2". I think that he's 6'3", 212 pounds. Olave's 6 foot 190. They're both fast, and also Rome Odunze is better after the catch. 5.2 yak perception is good. 15% missed tackles force perception is good. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns and 1 punt return touchdown. You guys, if you're OGs of the channel, you know I like dynamic wide receivers. He checks all of those boxes. So I really like him. I like his high-end comp as someone like Justin Jefferson, where he truly could be. Again, I really do think that he has that special upside because the film guys do love him that much. And Jefferson's his absolute ceiling, right? Like a guy who can play inside and out, just be an absolute game changer. On the lower end, though, like guys who can also play inside and out, Chris Godwin and Michael Pittman, I think, are pretty good floor comps when it comes to these guys who, they play in the slot, they don't play in the slot, they have a fine ADOT, they can do a little bit after the catch, contested target percentage as well. They're guys who get open, so their targets aren't usually contested despite being good in contested catch situations. They're all athletic. Like Chris Godwin, I know that we think about him now and it's like, he's like the slot who doesn't do much. Pre-injury Chris Godwin, like year 3 breakout next to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin was a dog. Like it wouldn't shock me at all for Rome Odunze to be somewhere on that spectrum of like big slots that can play everywhere. He looks really good. So again, if you're on the Patreon and stuff, you're going to see Rome Odunze is not loved by the model. In my rankings, again, I'll just be treating him as an elite wide receiver prospect. Now, moving on from that, we have our first round wide receivers. This is also a single man tier of just Brian Thomas Jr. He's my wide receiver 4. I feel pretty strongly about that, and I don't really see myself budging on Brian Thomas here. It's the big 3, then Brian Thomas Jr., and then a huge tier of a bunch of other guys. But when we look at kind of what Brian Thomas Jr. did at LSU, it's pretty impressive. He had 2.86 receiving yards per team pass attempt next to Malik Nabers' 3.82. You can see Brian Thomas Jr.'s 2.86 was actually more than what Justin Jefferson had his final year at LSU. Not to say that Brian Thomas Jr. is better than Justin Jefferson, but it's just to say, like, he had a huge part of an offense next to Malik Nabers, who's a certified stud, and that means something. Now, he did have 68 catches, 1,177 receiving yards, 17 touchdowns, and on top of that, what's really exciting is his athleticism. He is 210 pounds, about 6'3", 4.33 40-yard dash, and he gets a lot of these, like, Christian Watson, Martavis Bryant, like, field stretcher type of comparisons. And it's interesting. You guys know, film is not my specialty. I ran them through the comps, and the interesting part here is those guys, like I included them here so you could see, like your Cortland Suttons and Terry McLaurins and Martavis Bryants, their missed tackles forced per reception and yak numbers aren't that great, right? Like McLaurin and Sutton, both guys with under 5 yak per reception, all of them under 20% yak per or missed tackles forced per reception. Brian Thomas had a 22% missed tackles forced per reception, 5.3 yards after catch per reception, and then a 12.2 ADOT, right? So like Sutton, 16.6, Martavis Bryant, 15.2. You can kind of see, like, as much as Brian Thomas Jr. gets painted as a field stretcher, and I think he is, right? You see most of his highlights, and, really my tape consumption is watching the QB School's Patreon cut-ups, and, just from watching, like, his Jaden Daniels breakdowns, you see Brian Thomas on the screen and what he's doing. He's definitely someone who wins downfield and is electric and all of that, but, I mean, his peripherals, like his ADOT, his yak per reception, his missed tackles forced per reception, some people sort of shoehorn him into that deep threat role. It seems like that's going to be what he projects at first, but it seems like there's a little bit more upside there for him to be like kind of dynamic after the catch, maybe work his way into being a featured like X-type wide receiver where it's not just the deep routes and the go balls. So he looks really fun, and he's on this kind of spectrum of, like, again, those field stretchers like T. Higgins. And T. Higgins was interesting, though. I think that he's one of the best comps for Brian Thomas Jr. because he has that 20% missed tackles forced per reception number, which is more Brian Thomas Jr. like than it is, like Martavis Bryant, where they're not doing much after the catch. So something to really think about. It's a weird archetype that there's not really a huge sample size, right? Like Rashad Bateman's in there, Chris Godwin's in there, though I think both of them are more comfortable out of the slot. And then Sutton, McClure, and Martavis are like what people think that he plays like, but then he also is better after the catch and not that much of a one-trick pony in terms of the numbers. Now, here is the biggest knock on Brian Thomas Jr. right now. He has one season. When we filter for wide receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds with under a 17% receiving yard market share in year 1, under a 20% in year 2, and then over a 20% in year 3, you get a pretty rough list. It is Metcalf as like the only hit, and then Calvin Benjamin, Cordarrelle Patterson, Terrace Marshall, Curtis Samuel, Jamison Williams, Greg Little, Justin Hunter, John Mechie. Not good. Now, I think DK Metcalf's actually like kind of an interesting comp for him. Not that he's like the same like rocked up crazy athlete, but it's a similar style player next to, he was next to AJ Brown, Brian Thomas Jr. next to Malik Nabers. So there's a little bit of a comp there, but that is the biggest downside on him. That one strong season is a little bit tough. Now, the same exact knock is for A.D. Mitchell, who's also on this graphic here, that we're going to put as our first wide receiver in the first and second round tier. Now, A.D. Mitchell has that issue, but he murdered the combine as well. And he projects to me more like your, one-dimensional field stretchers like McLaurin, like Cortland Sutton, where we look at what A.D. Mitchell's comps look like out of Texas. He's playing next to Xavier Worthy. These feel like more of your run-of-the-mill deep threat type of guys, right? Where we're looking at Mike Wallace, DJ Chark, George Pickens, Cortland Sutton, guys who have high ADOTs. They're not playing in the slot a ton. They're not doing a whole lot after the catch. They're great in contested situations. Like, to me, I think George Pickens is kind of the perfect comp for A.D. Mitchell as just like this slender downfield receiver. I know I've heard some people say like CeeDee Lamb is a comp for him. CeeDee Lamb, we saw with the Malik Nabers screenshot, had like 8.8 yards at the catch per reception. After the catch, they are not even in the same league. A.D. Mitchell, looks more like your traditional, he could also have the upside of Brian Thomas Jr. where he could be a true X wide receiver, but then he could also be pigeonholed into your field stretching like DJ Chark kind of role. So that's kind of the upside and downside with him. Brian Thomas Jr. is a tier ahead because he had a high enough base grade where like his final season at LSU was good enough to carry him to a base grade that qualified for a multiplier that got him into elite. A.D. Mitchell, not so much. This is pretty much a tier of all gold tier wide receivers. Now after that we have Xavier Worthy, who is another interesting one. He's also out of Texas. He murdered the combine. He broke the 40-yard dash record, which is just bonkers. I got to be honest, I'm not sure. I don't know that we were ever going to see it get broken, but he runs a 4.21, which is bonkers. Now, again, we knew he was going to be fast, but a 4.21 takes him from, okay, he's fast if he runs like a 4.3 flat, but breaking the record now takes him from like a top 50 pick. Not quite a lock for first round, but like, man, a team could just, we just saw Henry Ruggs. We saw Henry Ruggs go, first wide receiver off the board in a class with Jefferson. I'm not saying a team should take Xavier Worthy first, but there might be a team out there that sees him. We had the same thing with Jameson Williams, where I think Jameson Williams is like a top 15 pick. A team might just see that speed and be like, you know what? He could be a great use for our team. Maybe not like a focal point for fantasy purposes, but a guy that we really want. So we could see him get drafted much higher. He does have, he's 20 pounds lighter than Henry Ruggs, but 4.2 speed, 41-inch vertical. He's explosive. He's fast. That's all really fun. Now, the issue is that he does give off like, Henry Ruggs, John Ross, Jameson Williams type of vibes with just breaking the 40-yard dash record and not being like the prettiest profile of all time. Now, the thing that scares me with him is he's Rondale Moore-ish, where he just has like a really strong first season and then it never got back to that point. So like when you peak in your freshman year and it never really gets back to that spot, it's a little bit of a red flag. His freshman year, he had 62 catches, 981 yards, 12 touchdowns. This is him in terms of receiving yards per team pass attempt next to Rondale Moore, who had the similar case where he had just one good year. Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Rome Odunze, the top three wide receivers in this class. And then also John Ross and Henry Ruggs. So it's easy to say he definitely has a better profile than Ruggs and John Ross, right? Where that year one is at least way above that line. It's really strong. Now, the fact that he peaked there isn't a death sentence, but it's certainly not a green flag. Like, it's definitely not good that he's never quite gotten back to that spot. Now, I will say there's been a lot of good receivers in this offense where you've had Bijan Robinson, you've had JT Sanders, you've had, of course, A.D. Mitchell this past year. I'm trying to think of like the other Texas wide receivers that maybe were there when he was a freshman, but you certainly had Jordan Whittington. You might have had Devin Duvernay and Colin Johnson when he was a freshman, but I'm going to say probably not. But you guys get what I'm saying. There's a lot of good players in this offense, so maybe it's tougher to command that big of a share, but it's not great for his profile. Now, I will say that he has a fun profile in general, where when I put in his numbers, he's a great yak guy, 7.3 yards after catch per reception. A lot of that's on burners. That's why his missed tackles force isn't that great. He's not really having a lot of contested catch situations. He's under 200 pounds in this comp list. 13.7 average depth of target. It's a fun list where you can see the upside where like Devontae Smith, Marquise Brown, Zay Flowers are all, to me, like his ceiling of guys that are like undersized, fun. I think Marquise Brown's probably the closest one you're going to get. both really fun players, but then you also have the downside of Jamison Williams, Henry Ruggs, Marvin Mims, John Ross. So it's, a pretty mixed bag, but that's really what you're going to get at this point with these wide receivers. Now, to just kind of before we get into the next receiver, to just reflect a little bit, I do agree that this is one of the best wide receiver classes maybe of all time, but I do think that there is a pretty big tier break where, the top two are amazing, Rome Odunze is amazing, and then it's a pretty big tier gap to Brian Thomas Jr., and then to a really flat tier where I could see, the 110 being almost the same value as the 203, 204, right? A late first, early second, there's so many of these wide receivers, and none of them to me have really stuck out, that there's a really flat tier where I wouldn't really want to be the first one to take a guy at the top of this tier. Now, we talk about our next receiver, our wide receiver 7. We have Troy Franklin out of Oregon. And this is the part of my brain that's nerdy, loves numbers, loves analytics. Troy Franklin pops in everything that we really want him to pop in. I'm trying to make is this what I'm looking for? No. But you can see here, this is him next to all the wide receivers we've talked about. In year 1, not great at all in terms of receiving yards per team pass attempt. Year 2, he is right there with Malik Nabers, but well below Marvin Harrison Jr. Then in year 3, he is behind just Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr. So the last 2 years, in terms of just production, he's right in the mix, with the top 3 wide receivers. He probably has the third best analytical profile of this entire group. Now, I think that it shows some growth that I have him all the way down at wide receiver 7. I know some guys, I think me in the past would have had him as wide receiver 4. But he didn't have the best combine. He weighed in really light, man. He weighed in at 176 pounds. His best comp on relativeathleticscore.com is Robbie Anderson. I think that's a good comp for him, where he's this really slender, outside receiver. He could just sort of get pigeonholed into a Robbie Anderson, DJ Chark type field stretcher, or he could be more than that. I will say, this is from the Next Gen Stats model. He has the second best production score, right? They have, I think, an athleticism score and a production score that mixes together for the Next Gen Stats score. In terms of production, he is the second best out of the Pac-12 over the last 5 years, ahead of Addison, Drake London, and Michael Pittman, behind just Rome Odunze. So, great profile, great production, but I think this is a really good point by Jacob Sanderson. It didn't work for those people, but it might for us, where we've seen now KJ Hamler, Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore, Marvin Mims, Wan'Dale Robinson. These are guys that are undersized, analytical, darling wide receivers that the NFL just isn't all that interested in. Where I think Troy Franklin's going to be a second-round pick. He'll be fine, but they're not nearly as in love with Troy Franklin as the fantasy community is. I don't put much stock into the combine drills, but he sucked, man. He was not good in the combine drills. He ran 4.41 is fine. That's a good speed for his, but for his size at 176 pounds, we would have liked him to break 4.4. He comes out on the gauntlet and just weaves so insanely hard that it's a meme on Twitter. He's one of the losers of the combine despite running a 4.4. And again, we don't care much about the combine, but I think that he's almost a lock to not get drafted in the first round at this point. So he's tough. He's someone that I'm not excited to draft or really even talk about, but he's someone the numbers love. Now, I know that this tweet from Jacob is about Xavier Worthy, but it applies to Troy Franklin as well, and a lot of these pet players that the analyst community has year in and year out. I think it's better to just kind of remove yourself from that and look at everything from a broad angle, which is what I'm trying to do these days. Now, I've seen comps with Troy Franklin all the way from Marquez Valdez-Scantling of this guy sucks to Devontae Smith, where he can be this very nuanced player in the NFL. So wide range of outcomes, awful combine, pretty much a lock to be a second-round draft pick in the NFL. He's fun. This is about as low as I can put him just based on what his numbers are, but in the past we've been deceived by that. So Troy Franklin, we're going to have him as wide receiver 7. Now wide receiver 8. If there was anybody that was going to unseat Brian Thomas Jr. as wide receiver 4, I could see it being this player. This is a player that the analytics community doesn't like, the film community doesn't like, but the more I look at him, the more I want to draft Keon Coleman. First thing with Keon Coleman is everyone on Twitter, you would think that Keon Coleman ran a 4.8. Everyone was saying, oh, he bombed the combine. Oh my God, he ran so slow. Now, of course, we just talked about a bunch of guys who, ran in the, Troy Franklin ran a 4.4. Keon Coleman ran a 4.61, which isn't great, right? You can see here that that's a 4.05 grade. That's like what, in the 40th percentile for 40s. It's not great for wide receivers. We talked about it earlier. Combine doesn't matter a ton. The thing is that he still had a 9.23 RAS. Still came in big as hell, 6'3", 213 pounds, 4.61 sure. But we've seen wide receivers, right? I have a comp here of Allen Robinson. I want to say T. Higgins ran slower than a 4.6. I don't think DeAndre Hopkins is all that fast. And the big thing here is his 10-yard split, 1.54, amazing. 38-inch vertical, amazing. 10-foot broad jump, amazing. So he's explosive. At least he doesn't have straight line speed, but he's explosive. And the thing that I thought was really crazy is his on-the-field drills were really good here. These are 2 tweets from Next Gen Stats. You can see the bottom one in the gauntlet. So you're catching the ball, you're turning around, you're catching the ball, and you're running down the line, catching a ball on each side. He hit 20 miles per hour in that drill, faster than any other wide receiver, which means he has arrogant hands. All right, he trusts his hands if he's going to run that fast in a high pressure situation. To me, that just tells me that he's a baller. You look at the rest. He hit the 15th fastest 40-yard dash miles per hour, which isn't good at all. But on the on-field drills, he's running everything: game speed, trusting his hands, out there running routes, like not just jogging through things. Where he had the 3rd fastest slant, the 4th fastest dagger, tied for the 2nd fastest go ball, tied for the 2nd fastest slot strike. He is out there on the field, running, having functional athleticism. This is a guy who played basketball at Michigan State his freshman year, kind of has some Drake London to his profile in that regard. He's interesting, right? He falls on the spectrum I wanted to talk about earlier. He falls on the spectrum of your contested catch guys, right? We're all at the top. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Alec Pierce, Denzel Mims, Quentin Johnson, N'Keal Harry, Terrace Marshall. My goodness, is that a crazy bad list of players. But then T. Higgins, George Pickens, Jamar Chase, Jaden Reed, Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Treylon Burks, Chase Claypool, DJ Moore, Drake London. Drake London's one of my favorite comps for Keon Coleman. So you kind of have to decide, in terms of these guys that had 20% or more of their targets in college be contested catches, where do we fall? These are round 1 and 2 wide receivers since I believe 2018 to have a 20% or more contested catch percentage. So that's kind of the issue with him, is like he could be N'Keal Harry, he could be T. Higgins, Drake London, DK Metcalf, all these good wide receivers. He is one of the biggest mixed bags, but to me, he has the profile. He has this, size, speed, clear like X wide receiver. The upside is all there, where he could develop into a true X, like a Drake London, be a target dominator, be amazing, just really fun. But then it comes into question, why do his numbers suck? Right, we look here at all the receivers that are in this tier, and Keon Coleman, like in terms of receiving yards per team pass attempts, like just fine in year 2, and then in year 3, the worst of the bunch. This past year was rough for him, but you do have to remember, they have Trey Benson in this offense, Jaheim Bell, Johnny Wilson, their top quarterback, Jordan Travis, tore his ACL with like 4 games left. So it all kind of made things murky there. I will say he's a really fun player. He's like crazy dripped out. Or I remember watching games this year where he'd have like 2 mouthpieces, like 1 leg sleeve, like an arm sleeve. He's dripped out. He's taking punt returns too, which like isn't great for a 4.6 guy, and something that N'Keal Harry did as well. So it's not like the end all be all, but you guys know I like my dynamic wide receivers. The fact that he is a big receiver that's even like taking punt returns, I think is like cool. So he's a fun player, man, where I could see him being the next Quentin Johnson, Treylon Burks, contested catch merchant. He ends up sucking. I could see him having more nuance than that, being this like uber athlete that could have played basketball. We've seen guys like Antonio Gates just make a living off of jump balls. Same with like Mike Williams. He could be that kind of guy as well. He seems like a special athlete. I think that he's a lot better on the field than that 4.6, 140 time would suggest. So Keon Coleman for me is a guy that I keep fighting with myself to move up and move up and move up. He's at 8 right now. By draft day, I could see him go up as high as number 4. Now, our number 9 wide receiver in this tier, this is again growth. 2020 me would have buried Lad McConkey, but this is really the lowest I can put him, despite having a pretty terrible analytics profile. Where we look here, he is just going to be on the bottom of all of these, right? Where year 2, he is above A.D. Mitchell and Brian Thomas Jr., but just barely. Year 3, he's on the bottom. Year 4, he's the only non-early declare in this group for me. Then we go a step further. Shout out JC Dynasty, or JCJ Dynasty. I'm in a league with him. These are wide receivers drafted day 1 and day 2 since 2010 with 0, 1.75 or better receiving yards per team pass attempt seasons. Michael Wilson, Trey Tucker, Danny Gray, Josh Palmer, Terrace Marshall, Van Jefferson, Metcalf, McCole Hardman, Terry McLaurin, Braxton Miller. It's just, I mean, it's bad. It's bad, right? So the production numbers say that he's bad. Now, we have to remember, he played at Georgia, right? So at Georgia, it's going to be tough where he's a white guy named Lad McConkey. He's not going to get, as a freshman, he's not going to get playing time over the 5-star recruits. There's just absolutely no way. But we have to remember the guys that he was playing with, right? He's playing with George Pickens. He's playing with A.D. Mitchell. He's playing with Jermaine Burton before he transferred from Georgia to Alabama. Then you have James Cook. Then you also have you have Darnell Washington. You have Brock Bowers, who I didn't even mention. You have a billion players, all of them going to the NFL. So it's tough to stand out early there. But there is some gold here with Lad McConkey. The film guys drool over him. On top of that, you have per route numbers, like this tweet here, that kind of outlines what there is to like with him. Did I miss it? Yeah, so NCAA receiving PPR points per route run since the 2018 draft. You have Higgins, Waddle, Wandale. It's not a perfect list, but you have Hollywood on there. You have Devontae Smith. You have Olave, Chase, Lamb, JSN, Garrett Wilson. It's a pretty good stat. The leaders in the 2024 class, Marvin Harrison Jr., then Lad McConkey. Shout out Dynasty Zoltan on Twitter. So on a per route basis, I know Lad McConkey has a lot of really good yards per route run stats. He kind of looks like Puka in that aspect, where Puka was a really good per route type of wide receiver. And then also with Lad McConkey, we have this, where Scott Barrett tweeted percentage of targets deemed open on throws 5 or more yards downfield, 59% of them. So he's open all the time. He's always open. He's good on a per route basis. I don't know what his ceiling is. Everyone's going to bring up some random white wide receiver. But we have seen those guys like Wes Welker and Julian Edelman had wide receiver 1 seasons. So I could see it where he's like a PPR machine. But the crazy part is that for a guy named Lad McConkey, he has physical numbers that are comparable to Garrett Wilson. Both 5'11", 185. Both ran in the 4.3s. Just absolutely bonkers stuff for Lad McConkey. He tested well. Film guys really like him. We have Lance Zierlein here, who I use his grades in my model. 6.37 plus, anything better than a 6.37 and better is essentially what I've, categorized. I know that Lance hasn't himself, but just in terms of what I use them for, essentially anyone at 6.37 or better, or I think actually 6.36 or better, is essentially a first round grade. 6.37 would be like a late first type of grade, but that's where he has him at. He has him tied with A.D. Mitchell. He has him ahead of Keon Coleman there at the bottom. He likes him. A lot of people like him. I think people like him a lot more than me. I know some people have him as high as wide receiver 4, so I don't know that I'll draft him a ton, but this is about as low as I can put him, right? He crushes the combine. He comes from Georgia, a good school. He's apparently a guy who can win right away, and, similar to guys like Addison in the past, maybe I've slept on, where they can just come right in. They have a trump card where they can run routes. Now, if his reception perception from Matt Harmon comes out and something doesn't add up there for Matt, then I'll move him down. As soon as you give me the first inkling of I can move him back to where 2020 Ron would have put him, I'm down for it. But that's as high as I can put Lad McConkey, wide receiver 9. Now, our last tier here to round out the top 10 are day 3 guys that I don't think have any chance of going first round, but essentially my 2 targets that are going to go on day 2 of the NFL draft. We have Jalen Polk, and we have honorable mention Jalen McMillan. We'll round it out with the Washington wide receivers. I think NFL teams are going to value them a lot more just because, they were on a winning team. And if you're watching Odunze's tape, somebody else might pop. If you're watching Jalen Polk's tape, somebody else might pop. Same thing with Penix. I could see them getting drafted higher than we think. And then on top of that, I like betting on these 2 guys because they have fun skill sets where Jalen McMillan is a slot guy who kind of looks like a mini version of JSN. I know that he's been getting that comp a lot, where he plays in the slot, he's smooth, he's good after the catch, he makes good catches, he's reliable, all of that. Down the stretch, he had 2 touchdowns for the college football playoffs. Jalen Polk, more of your traditional X wide receiver. That's something that's always going to translate to the NFL. So 2 archetypes we like, and then we also have reasoning for why their production might not have been as good as we wanted because they played in an offense together, and then also with Odunze. So they all kind of cannibalize each other, which is why, they're not going to show up well in the model, but I'm fine pushing them ahead just because their numbers are sort of muffled by that. Now, that is going to do it for our top 10. I did want to briefly show you guys kind of how this class stacks up. We have the class's overall strength here. So I came up with a quality score where if you had a legendary wide receiver, you got 10 points. If you had an elite wide receiver in your class, you got 8 points. A gold wide receiver gets you 5 points. 2024, as of right now, is the third best wide receiver class in my database since 2007. It is behind only 2014, which I believe was Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Allen Robinson, Brandon Cooks. And I'm probably missing guys. That's how crazy that class was. That class was bonkers. I think Devontae Adams was in there too. I think I might have said that. Then 2020, I believe, was the Justin Jefferson class with like Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb and all of those guys. Or is it? Let me double check. I do think that's what it is. Yeah, no, it's 100% the Justin Jefferson class. So that's the second best, really close with 2024. This is a special class. It should jump up once Malik Nabers gets his legendary designation. So really strong wide receiver class. It's everything it's built up to be, but I will say there is a pretty huge gap where I wouldn't really want to spend the first round rookie pick on any of the wide receivers outside of the top 3. I think if I had to, it would be Brian Thomas Jr., but I wouldn't love it. I would rather, like 201, take my pick of the litter. Now, if you want access to all of the RS Grade database stuff, it's all on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You can find that in the description and the comment section down below. I have all of my post-combine RS grades updated. They're all on there. If you want to search through my RS grades all the way back to 2007, that's all on there. You can look through my tight ends, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. We have dynasty rankings that I'm going to update as soon as we get the free agency landing spots next week. On top of that, I'm going to do rookie comps. So you saw in this video, like the ADOT and the slot percentage and stuff. I'm going to go through this entire class and put out rookie comps on the Patreon and then do it again after the draft and we get official draft capital. So a lot of really cool stuff coming there for only I think $8 a month. So if that's interesting to you, make sure you check it out. If not, it's all good. But it feels good to be back. It feels good to be talking wide receivers. We should have a running back rankings version of this later in the week. And I should have a 2-round rookie mock with a special guest like tomorrow or Friday. So be on the lookout for that. We have a lot of content coming here as always. I appreciate you guys sticking around, watching the entire thing, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold.